This is Ali Heather, founder and CEO of Lilia AI, and I'm excited to introduce our guest speaker for our webinar, Miss Kristen Ellefson. I'll let Kristen take it over from here to talk about her background further. Thank you.
Awesome. Hi, Ali. So nice to be here today. So thank you guys for making time. I'm really excited to share more about what we're doing at Nurture, and just answer any questions that you have about startup life and hopefully leave you inspired because there's never been more opportunity in the entrepreneurship space than ever before. But our journey here, kind of starts with our educational background. I know a lot of you guys are current students, and that's how we started our startup. We were studying at MIT, and right before I went back to school, my best friend let me know that she had been suffering from postpartum depression, and she had hidden this from her spouse, from her friends like me, and even from her doctor. So her doctor screened her appropriately, which many women don't even have that privilege. But she looked at the questionnaire and decided to hide the fact that she needed help because she thought her child would be taken away. And this really illustrated to me the problem with our reactive healthcare system. We essentially wait for people to get sick and then kid ourselves that we're good at catching their needs and supporting them from there. So, as I really thought through this heavy issue that my friend was going through, I researched it further and found out that 85% of women with this disorder were experiencing the exact same thing. They were falling through the cracks, they were undiagnosed and untreated. And I was really shocked because postpartum depression, first of all, it's a bit of a misnomer. So we think we can catch it after birth, when in reality, more than half of all cases actually start during pregnancy. So this is why your OBGYN could be a crucial ally in starting to find out that you have this disorder and to begin treatment. But unfortunately, OBGYNs, they're lacking the right tools. It's really hard to screen in those short appointment windows. And again, we keep focusing on the postpartum checkup as an important screening area, but 40% of patients actually skip that checkup. So all of this told us that why are we waiting for people to get sick and relying on these traditional screeners when in reality, postpartum depression is actually a really homogenous form of depression, has a clear onset and offset, very concrete symptoms, and it's ideally suited for machine learning and AI applications. So dug a little deeper, and frankly, what happened at that point is I got pissed off. AI was being used in all these other areas of healthcare. You guys can imagine the gambit here. But no one was applying it to this problem. It's a bit of a women's health conundrum. We're not tending to do a lot of innovation in this space. We have lower reimbursement in general, and it just doesn't get funded at the same rate. So I turned that sort of, I don't know, pissed offness is not a word, but I turned that feeling that I had and decided to just kind of make my year at MIT all about that. So started researching it in different classes. Every class project I had was about it. And next thing you know, we were winning competitions on campus. So the IDEAS challenge from MIT Solve, and then had the opportunity to really put it all on the line. Graduation was coming. So it's like, okay, we're either going to go back to the corporate world and get jobs there, or we had a litmus test. There's something called MIT Delta V, which is a really prestigious accelerator for MIT students. They take about 20 teams from across the ecosystem every year. So you can imagine postdocs, business students, CS, the best and the brightest are applying, hundreds of applications. And again, it's hard to get selected, but it turned out we made the cut and they asked us to join the accelerator that summer, and we realized we really had something. So at that point, I think it is really important, by the way, to think through, what makes it worth it for you? And that's never going to change. I have 6-month goals right now. If we don't hit those goals, then I need to figure out, is this worth my time? And so that setting those sort of stages along the way are really going to be helpful to you. But really just don't wait for someone to like tap you on the shoulder and like have this aha moment. I think my key takeaway from what we did at Nurture was really if you're irked by something, perhaps others are as well. Perhaps you found a systemic flaw, and really lean into that hyperfixation. If you can find yourself at 11 p.m. fixed on Googling something, trying to understand everything you can about something, this might be that kind of thing where you can sustain working 60, 80 hours a week because it's something that clearly matters to you. So, figure out what you feel emotionally about. But then I'll walk you through one of my biggest regrets. And I feel like the regret just goes forever. But we had this amazing opportunity at this first accelerator. By the way, I can tell you about 8 other accelerators we've been in that I can't recommend accelerators enough. But the stage that you're at is really critical. And then what you can get out of each accelerator is going to be different. And this was a 3-month journey. The best people at the business school and entrepreneurship community at MIT kind of coming together to really take some companies that were multiple years in and some companies like ours that had like 3 months of a concept kind of sketched out. And they push you. And the key concept that they really push is you better build a mousetrap. And so, what is the least amount of the company that you can build to get the most traction and proof points that show you that this business is worth your time, and worth investing? So, that's something that we didn't do. And I'm probably to blame for that. I'm a bit of a perfectionist. Healthcare is different, by the way. So we were also working with more of a generic accelerator. So companies from every single background you can imagine. And I do love the adage, move fast and break things. I think that's a really good one. But in healthcare, there should be a huge asterisk because lives hang in the balance. And so we have higher regulation and we should also have higher thresholds for what we will do with patients. And so in that 3-month time period, it was really hard to build something, especially for mental health, that we felt comfortable really testing on patients. But that is something that we should have spent more time on. So, I can't wait to learn more about what you guys are passionate about, but would love to think through, could you put together a fake Facebook page and an ad and have people click different, give you their email address or have them on a beta list. So all the different traction points that you can use to kind of prove that there's a threshold of interest quickly within like 90 days max, right? So make sure that you're comfortable getting that out there. And the other thing that I really, that sticks with me a little bit is the idea that your MVP had better embarrass you. So if your MVP doesn't embarrass you, then that's not an MVP. It should be a little wonky. It should be, but that's because you're trying to move quickly and save time. And so what you're seeing with me today is it's the 2-year-ish anniversary of us getting out of us starting Delta V. But I would tell you that we should be 12 months ahead. So the amount of traction that we've made is significantly less because we've taken time and didn't move as quickly as we could have at different junctures. So really focus on those traction points because it'll also give you that nice litmus test on, should I be moving with option A or option B? And then some other things that I think were really interesting along the way. Gosh, it'd be so fun if you, by the way, feel free to just chime in, because lectures are never that fun. But one thing I think people don't realize about entrepreneurship is 90% of your job is just receiving advice. So at the end of the day, you are talking to mentors, potential investors, you're doing product market fit research, you're talking to patients. When you look back on a given week, you'll just realize you sat there and people kind of tried to give you kernels of wisdom, but you honestly can't do it all. So the other thing that you're going to do is receive 100 pieces of advice in a week, and hopefully know which ones to quickly throw away. So you're only going to be able to execute on so much of it. So that's got to be your secret sauce, is really getting that advice, and B, executing on just a small amount of it. But the other interesting thing I don't think I realized at an early stage was how much the startup is really just about pitching. So on a given week, if I'm fundraising, it could be 30 hours of pitching. We're talking back to back for almost 8 hours a day, different investors over and over again. Then you have your sales calls and you're pitching. And then you have mentor calls and you're pitching in a different way. And so one thing I think I wish I would have gotten more comfortable with more quickly is um, really believing in like the message that we were telling because it does take reps. Honestly, it took me 6 months, and every time it was coming out of my mouth, it was fumbling, and people were sensing my nervousness. But it is really worth your time. And now that we have ChatGPT, by the way, it's going to take you half the time it took me at the earlier days. But really spend possibly 40 hours, like in a whole week, on just thinking through like, how do you explain what you do in one sentence? And every single different kind of person that's going to hear that. So, nurturing the minds of moms is going to resonate with patients, but it's not necessarily going to resonate with clinicians or with investors who want to hear AI buzzwords or that it's clinically proven to build that. But really making sure that you can almost put it on autopilot. It's totally worth your time. And the earlier you can do it, the better, because people are going to judge and open up their networks completely based on that. And believe it or not, the clock is ticking from the day that you start your company. People are starting to have their own ideas of like, oh, you've been doing this for 6 months. Well, you should be look like this, talk like this, and have done this. So make sure that you're ahead of the curve and not behind it, because those are the things that are really going to open up those critical introductions. But Adam, I think I see you have a question.
Yes, we got a question in the chat. I just wanted to bring it up. The question is, how did your experience as an MBA student at MIT Sloan help with your entrepreneurial journey?
Oh my goodness. It's so fun. I think you start to realize like there's sort of different flavors of entrepreneurship, and we all have different relative strengths that we bring. But what business school just really hones in you is like an appreciation of commercialization and how to question from the early, sometimes we can get caught in the trap of like, what's cool? What will patients like? This would make such a difference. But if you can't sell it, then you're going to be SOL. So at the end of the day, the first thing you should be asking yourself is who's the buyer? Who owns the buyer? And how are you going to access them? So all of these things I think were really critical, and business school really gave us the capacity to do that. With that being said, I think there's some drawbacks to being a business school type founder because it's a short window. We had an executive MBA that was 15 months, no, it was 12 months. So we had a really short, tight window. But I'm so jealous of master students, postdoc, et cetera. If you are really there and have the backing of the school to do some really cool research, that just expands the timeline of what you can accomplish and kind of do it while at school so that you can have the resources associated with that program. And again, winning different competitions or having those resources, the network was incredible right off the bat. But Miriam, I see you have a question.
Yeah, thank you for being here, and I hope you guys can hear me now. But my question is, when I was sort of surfing the Nurture website, the thing that was really stood out to me is the amount of like integration. So I saw a couple of times that you integrate with and you collaborate with the doctors, the OB-GYN, the
Mhm.
psychiatrist, and you also get to collaborate with the patient essentially. So I was kind of curious what specific data modalities are integrated into your training pipeline? Like what kind of protocols do you use to validate and maintain the data? So you mentioned like one thing you mentioned was, like what inspired the ideas, your friend and she was screened, and she was screened with a standard like depression screening. So what kind of do you use screening tools like that? Do you use kind of like essentially what's the input that you're inputting into this and how are you validating the output?
Yeah. Oh my God, I could nerd out all day over the science behind what we do. And all credit goes to my chief science officer, Dr. Martin Frosch, who's the mind behind the world's leading algorithm for prediction of postpartum depression. And I know this because I've spoken to almost every researcher in the world that's doing this. You'll quickly realize they're all in Europe. Europe has way better data sets, really interesting ways like they pull in SDOH data and have just more interoperability from the ground up. So when you start building an algorithm in healthcare in the US, you're already at a bit of a disadvantage. But with that being said, there are some important data sets that academic researchers like our chief science officer can get their hands on. Things like PRAMs from the CDC, there's NIH data sets, et cetera, that are really representative of the US population, which is really key, right? So you can't take a data set from Europe and apply that to the US and expect for that to be representative of our very diverse population. So we're lucky enough to have that sort of as the backbone of what we're doing. But you also have to make key decisions when you're building out your algorithm and kind of refining what your goals are and also how you're going to get there. So right off the bat, our goal is to predict, but also give ourselves an intervention window. There's many things that are predictive of postpartum depression right up to the day of the birth. So I could predict you'll have postpartum depression with really high accuracy based on a few key features then. But I've missed half of all cases because the other half of cases are starting during pregnancy, and I've only given myself a 2-week window to offer any intervention or help. So we restricted ourselves to pre-pregnancy features. So technically, before you're even pregnant, we could tell you if you're at risk. And then we restricted ourselves to as few features as possible. You'll see some algorithms that could leverage 100 features, but interoperability is another problem, right? So we realized that while we'd like to scrape an EMR for some of these data points, first of all, they're all snowflakes. One EMR is going to have 99 of the features, the other one's going to have 8. And so you're not building something that scales. But by having just a few features into our algorithm, we now not only have the opportunity to do EMR integrations if we wish, but we can also ask patients directly to fill out an 8-question screener. Old school, some of our sites, we even do paper and faxing, et cetera. But that just allows us to work with more patients. So Timur, I think I see a question.
Yeah. I guess just a follow-up question to what Mariam was saying. What is your company's competitive edge or differentiating factor in a market which is increasingly saturated with, mental health and AI-driven healthcare platforms? So what's I guess, the X factor that your company has?
It is really interesting because I always think of it like, if you're a carpenter, basically you see the problem as like solvable with a hammer. And so coming from a technology background and having sort of support in that area, we looked at the problem through a technology lens. But most founders that we have found in the space don't necessarily have that background. So we see a lot of clinicians who are like, we need to get more clinician care in front of patients. And so we're all just approaching it from our own biases and strengths. But with that being said, there weren't a lot of technology plays in our space. So we're one of just a handful. And we're the only one that's made a really big bet on prediction, which then allows us to do prevention at scale. And so the other interesting thing, if you think about the market for postpartum depression, today it's about an $18 billion market. But that's also based on the fact that only 15% of patients are diagnosed and seeking care. So when you look at an opportunity like nurtur, where we have a 0.96 area under the curve accuracy on our algorithm, we essentially take this small market and open it up as we can treat not just the 15%, but now the 85% that also need support. And it just greatly expands our capability to work with patients and own the patient from the earliest stages of pregnancy.
Yes, I guess one more question I had. I think you kind of like hinted upon it. I was wondering, like, can you please explain more about your business model? Like what's your revenue model? Like, is it B2B, like B2C, or is it a mix? And how do you
Um,
monetize while remaining accessible? Because I'm sure that postpartum care is, across the board, like every socioeconomic class, every woman in every socioeconomic class would appreciate that. So how would you monetize while remaining accessible?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I think one thing we have to remember is there's so many stakeholders in healthcare, right? So sometimes I joke that like maybe we should have sold yoga pants or chips or something, just very easy. But we chose healthcare, so here we are. So when you think about the group of women that we're trying to help, the best pathway through to them is their OBGYN. It's a very trusted relationship. The OB is so motivated to solve this problem. OBs are swamped and they don't really have a referral pathway today that works. Women on average could see up to a 12-month wait list if they're even referred out. So there's a huge desire to solve this problem. But now what we have to do is basically enable the patient and the OBGYN to see some benefit here. OBs are some of the lowest paid clinicians, the highest litigated against. And so one thing we're able to do is basically create an opportunity to not just treat the patient and help the workflow smooth out in that way, but we're also creating a billable event. So now that the patient is being treated by a behavioral health clinician, there are ways that we can integrate that back into the practice. And this is all CMS approved, value-based care carve out, but essentially there would be a revenue share from that as well. So that's one way that we do that, but Nurtur is more of a technology play as well. So there's ways that we partner with telehealth vendors and manage some of the technology behind the scenes, which is our tech management.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, so I'm a father of two. Unfortunately, my wife, she never experienced any postpartum depression, but I could imagine. I've heard horror stories about the effects that postpartum depression can have on not just the woman that gave birth to the kids, the mother, but also the family unit as a whole. So, I'm just curious. So far, I mean, nurture is still early on in its journey, right? I mean, is that
Yeah,
fair to
very
say?
cool. Yeah.
How has nurture been received amongst women and even men for that matter? Because I'm sure there's an equal amount of men that don't want to have to experience their wives suffering from postpartum depression. So how's it been received so far amongst the
Yeah.
just your customer base?
Oh my gosh. Well, there's so much to unpack there. So first of all, thanks for sharing your personal connection. And secondly, it is something that greatly impacts the family unit. So there's sort of a trailing 5-year impact to the infant, a woman's ability to go back to work and show up, turnover, et cetera. But the other interesting thing I always like to share is that it's not just women that get postpartum depression, it's also men. So men get it at about half the rate of women. And if one partner has it, it's even a higher chance that the other partner will have it. So we really do have to think about the entire family unit. But the reception has been really good. So patients love the modules that we have. They've learned a lot and they've kind of started referring to it as weightlifting for their mental health. So one thing we have to do, by the way, that's been a huge learning curve for me is I thought that being very clinical would be a positive, right? It builds trust. It's sort of based on clinical protocols and the language being sort of clinical. But what we learned is actually we had to sort of wellness wash a lot of what we do. So there is still a mental health stigma that's alive and well today. And so the more that we can be thoughtful about the way that we start a conversation from a place of positivity and not a place of scariness. So we're not saying you're going to have this problem and you need to work and invest in preventing it. We're saying, hey, your wellness deserves attention. Just like you take a prenatal vitamin to get the best possible outcome for you and your baby, let's work on your mental resilience. Let's baby proof your relationship. And so these are things that get patients more engaged along the way. But we've also had great support from our clinician partners. So they really enjoy the fact that we're taking care of mental health check-ins and a huge partner and letting them know of any issues along the way and being that safety net to refer patients to. So Kate, I'll grab your question next.
Hi, Kristen. I love the whole company's idea and just women's health. I was just curious, how do you reach all like the potential patients, users of your product, especially as you know, try to kind of expand and like provide them with this because I feel like it's such a nice, useful tool and like to help them. But then how do you find all of them, especially if some of them are suffering from depression and they're just like, ah.
Such a great question. And it really illustrates the power of the B to B to C play that we've designed. Women are overwhelmed during pregnancy. There's a sense of realness and excitement, but they're learning a lot. They're learning they can't eat sushi. They're learning like their body is growing and changing and trying so hard to prepare for next steps. So in many ways, there's not a lot of room or excitement about anything that doesn't have a rose-colored glasses effect. So that's where the OBGYN checkpoint is really powerful. So we're another checkpoint during the intake process. Essentially, you confirm the pregnancy at home, and at 5 to 7 weeks, hopefully you're finding yourself at your OBGYN at that first appointment, which is the longest. And so we are introduced at that point and then take over the patient outreach from there. So we give the clinician the prediction results of the future potential for postpartum depression. So everyone has that awareness and the clinician can choose to act on it. But at this point, we let patients go through our preventative self-guided therapy that's based on a clinically proven protocol that prevents more than half of all cases. And so they get to go through short bite-sized modules at home, different languages. And also this gives us an excuse to build a high-touch digital relationship with the patient. So we're checking in with them on their mental health every couple of weeks. And if they meet the criteria for any perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, we can then refer them to the right clinical care for their mental health. So that's sort of the secret sauce. But Miriam, what's your question?
Yeah, so you sort of already like recognized that the incidence of postpartum depression is going to be different across different populations, so the US and Europe, but also even like within the US. So I guess given the documented like disparities in postpartum depression, like the prevalence in access to care, how do you sort of like audit your model, like your model? How do you audit your model, like the performance across different cohorts? And are there any sort of bias tools that you use to sort of, you know, make it more accurate across different demographic groups?
I think I got the gist of that. I will admit you were kind of coming in and out a little bit, but let me take a first stab at it and then give me some follow-up questions. But essentially, our data and input was collected from 11 academic research centers from across the US, highly representative of the diverse population that we have here in the US. So the first model was trained on 8,500 records of the 10,000 record data set and then tested on the remaining 1,500 that were left. But the other thing I would say is our chief clinical officer, Dr. Shihan Fisher, he's a world-renowned perinatal mental health clinician and also does a really great job of making sure that we consider bias in everything as we go. Formerly, he was the assistant dean of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Northwestern University. As you can imagine, his title may have recently changed, but we definitely bring that lens to everything that we do. And the other thing that we have to acknowledge is just like you said, women from different backgrounds experience this very differently. Medicaid is a great example. So almost 1 in 2 Medicaid patients will experience postpartum depression compared to about 26 or 29% for private pay insurance. So we do know that and one of the prediction elements in our model also confirms this.
Yeah, very interesting. Actually, I'm very pleased to hear the fact that you guys are adding different, considering different factors. But sort of just related to that question is, I sort of got the gist of how it works, but is there a human factor involved after, like so they go to their OB-GYN, they get recommended for nurture, you guys give them modules, but there's sort of in between human factor that checks in with them as opposed to just, you know, like modules with the AI relationship?
Absolutely. And especially that's where I was talking earlier about like that really high threshold we have to set for ourselves in mental health. So no patient. So first of all, we do have this amazing prediction capability, but we layer it on top of standard depression screeners. So at any given point, we understand your future risk, but we also understand a snapshot of today's risk. And so what we're able to do every time you interact with our platform, we do a quick PHQ-2 and can pull that into the full PHQ-9 just to make sure that you're not talking to our platform instead of a person. And so if any help is needed, we refer to the maternal mental health hotline and also can refer out as well. Yeah. And Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, got another question in the chat. It says, how have clinicians, OBGYNs, psychiatrists, PCPs, et cetera, responded to nurture solutions?
Yeah, they get really excited. And so it's really interesting because we see different clinician sort of personas along the way. But one thing I've learned, and I love sharing this anecdote because one of our our chief commercial officer actually coined this for us, but he says, OBGYNs, the persona is that basically fairy godmother effect. They see themselves as delivering joy during pregnancy, making something really happy happen. And so the more we align ourselves with that messaging, the easier it is to get OBGYNs on board. But once they are on board, we hear great things. So they feel very excited about having a place to refer their patients. Because many OBGYNs, they say things like, I'm sprinkling Prozac on it like it's candy because I have nowhere to send them. And so they just want a tool to help sort of stop the bleeding a little bit, but then it's also a great way for them to help differentiate their practice. Another thing I learned along the way is OBGYNs are competing for patients, especially in these crowded urban environments. This is the kind of patient you want. And so you're really concerned with them having a positive conversations, et cetera. But you also want to be able to say, hey, we're offering AI solutions and we're concerned about your mental health and have already thought through this. So, Miriam, go ahead.
And I guess just related to that, the flip side of it is how do patients respond, especially when you tell them, I saw on the website that you feel better in like as little as like 10 minutes a day, which I'm guessing refers to like the modules. Do you ever like clinicians clinicians ever encounter sort of resistance because it might feel like sort of the homework to patients? How has been the patient reaction?
Oh gosh, I hear you. And part of the fun is being such an early stage startup, right? We have our hands in everything. So when it comes to patient engagement, that's me. I'm like, hi, I'm Kristen, the CEO. I'm texting you. And so one thing we hear from patients is some of them can feel overwhelmed. They're like, this feels like another thing on my to-do list. But they also at the same time appreciate the check-ins. And so we end up having sort of two core patient groups. There's the ones that are really excited about the content, and we'll see that they actually sit down the day that they onboard and they go through all the content at once. They're just going through it. And then we have groups who may never do the preventative content, but they love that we reach out and check in on their mental health every 2 weeks. So we define success a couple different ways, right? But both paths are hugely supportive to patients. Adam, go ahead.
Got another question in the chat. Oh, two questions actually. The first is, do you see an expansion to other maternal health or mental health conditions? Question two is, how do you see AI in medicine evolving over time?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit in kind of the area that we already are. So we say postpartum depression, but we know it's perinatal depression, and there's also perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. So we have sort of postpartum anxiety, things like that, that are also somewhat predictive that we're working on behind the scenes to be able to provide care for. That's very low-hanging fruit. I will say OBGYNs are clamoring for mental health support around menopause. So at some point, there is an amazing expansion opportunity there. And there's also some interesting opportunity to expand along the reproductive continuum the other way and into fertility care, where we know that mental health can play a huge role in your ability to conceive. And clinicians care about the outcomes that they can have at those fertility clinics. So those are on the roadmap. Go ahead, Timur.
Yeah, I just had one quick question about, I guess, measurement of KPI. So how do you measure your clinical outcomes, engagement, and maybe even impact for your users? Like, is there like a specific survey that you do?
Oh my gosh, you're so funny. So I was looking at that earlier today. And so when you look at a really long patient journey like ours, there's about 10 different metrics. And it depends on, so there's who was educated, who did the prediction, then who moved on to do their sessions, and then who actually allows us to do their behavioral health checks. And then the referral rate. So it's quite expansive. But if you sit down and actually look at your patient journey, those things matter. But the other thing we have to think about, so I guess I would say that's kind of bottom up. What about top down? So if our goal is to have payers eventually work with us, then we need to be better understanding things like ED readmittance, NICU utilization, C-section rates, and how we impact those so that we can sell into that market. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah. So, I mean, AI is the hot new thing on the market right now. You see it everywhere. Especially, I mean, it's becoming more and more prevalent in the medical community. So, I mean, in your opinion, I mean, Nurtur is an AI tool, or a company that has built an AI tool. Just out of curiosity, how do you see AI in medicine evolving over time? Just
Um,
generally.
Yeah, it's ubiquitous. It's so interesting to me because when we first started this company, quickly after we did MIT's Delta V, we did Techstars Healthcare out in Los Angeles. And so we redid a lot of our research and they actually make you speak to like 80 people in the span of 2 weeks. So we spoke to all sorts of decision makers, especially at health systems, but also beyond. And this was, gosh, only 18 months ago. The appetite for AI was almost not there. We're talking scared. They didn't have AI governance committees. It was discouraging. And so we realized that in that moment, you couldn't quite build for AI, for generative AI LLMs in mental health right off the bat. You had to have a lot of guardrails just to talk to people and get their buy-in on anything. But if you flash forward to today, the appetite's there. People are way more comfortable with it, and it's almost crazy if you don't. So, in many ways, I think if you were pushing through those objections like 18 months ago, you probably have an amazing generative AI product out there today. But we do know with healthcare is generally about 10 years behind everyone else, and we should and do have higher standards for what we can expose patients to than sort of the general market. Go ahead, Tamar.
Yeah, so I guess this is my last question. So I was wondering, like, and this question is more directed towards, I guess, you and your journey of in creating this whole company. Can you share some lessons learned from, I guess, early fundraising, especially when pitching a very female-focused health tech solution in a very male-dominated VC world? So would really appreciate if you could give some
Oh,
feedback.
man, well, this is being recorded, so I may have to tighten down a little bit on my answer. But it's tough out there. It's very tough out there. And so the other thing I'll say is you're going to get a lot of advice on how to raise. And I wish I would have taken more of it. So we got some really good advice, and in hindsight, not taking that advice has cost us time. And the round was, put together in a way that made it a little more difficult to invest. So I think really probably taking a lot of conversations to understand how the market will receive you today. Because again, my favorite response was just like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I met an investor and he was like, oof, women's health. And so you have to understand like what are the optics of raising at the moment in time, and also the specific niche market that you have, because there are only a few conventional investors that are going to invest in different spaces. And so you also need to understand their excitement about your space. And then never underestimate the power of angels. So I would say you guys are from some powerful schools, have some powerful backgrounds. And when you go to these schools, I remember MIT is like obsessed with conventional investment and raising these big rounds right off the bat. That doesn't have to be the way you do it. And actually, that's kind of not normal as well. And so understanding that your pre-seed round should probably be very small, friends and family type of round, so that you can build into maybe a time in 18, 24 months where either the market is going to be in a better place or you're better positioned to show the traction you need to raise the kind of round that you need.
Thank you.
Well, Kristen, I want to thank you so much for your time and coming here and speaking to all of us, answering our questions. It's a fantastic opportunity to hear from you and kind of your origin story and Nurtur's origin story. So on behalf of everyone on this call, I want to extend a very heartfelt thank you.
So nice to meet you guys. Your questions are incredible. If I can be supportive in any way, please let me know. And thank you for this opportunity, and have a great weekend, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. You as well.
Thank you.
You guys.
Yeah.
Bye.